discuss, perhaps not today because I'm going to run out of time, but during the course, that when you want to apply the idea of marketability to these two problems, Menger's origin of money and mine, origin of interest, there are two different marketabilities. At this point, I'm just introducing the subject. The detailed discussion will come. The two different kinds of marketability is, or are, number one, marketability in the large and marketability in the small. And what Menger did, please write down the German equivalent, Absatzfähigkeit.
Absatzfähigkeit.
But Menger did not come to distinguish between the two. I'm going to.
A with us.
Yes.
H. I. G. K. E.
I-E-T. Okay. K. No, K.
Oh, I-E-T. Okay, sorry.
No.
Yeah, oh, wait.
So,
Anyway, I think you know. We are in Germany.
no, we owe the memory of Menger to at least one or maybe two German words. One is
What was this again?
this one, Absatzfähigkeit.
Exchange.
Exchanging I-E, this here.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other is Grundsätze. How would you translate that into English?
Principles.
Grundsätze.
Grundsätze.
Principles.
So that's the principle of economics. That's the title of the book. So these two Germans, everybody owes, who is a participant of this, owes to herself or to himself to remember. Because I'm not sure if these German words were widely used before Menger, but certainly they were widely used after him. I take a bet on that. All right, so Menger introduced the word Absatzfähigkeit. I assume I'm right there, but I'm not an expert in language, and he left it there. He did not split the concept into marketability in the large and marketability in the small. That's yours truly who made the invention. And you will be the judge whether this splitting. I think Menger, if he had lived long enough and if he could have devoted his energies and talents to this, would have come to that. I'm quite convinced. But you see, I'm prejudiced because I came up with the idea that actually there are two kinds of marketability. Marketability in the large, which plays a role in explaining the origin of money. And then, I'm sure I will be able to convince you during the remaining 20 minutes that the idea of marketability in the small plays the same parallel, very important role in the theory of origin of interest. Because we have reformulated the problem of origin of interest by saying that we have to solve the problem how to convert income into wealth and wealth into income. if you solve that problem, then you made a good start in explaining interest. It's not clear. I'm not suggesting that you should all say, yes, yes, of course, I see that, because it's not obvious. But this is the thought, and once you have gone through it, you will not forget it, because it will be so plausible. I hope I can make it plausible enough. So here it is. You want to convert income to wealth. The idea is hoarding. You have to, whether it's a dirty word or a clean word, I don't care, but you just have to hoard something. And that's what the animals do without having the intellectual capacity of planning or anything, but they do it, they are hoarding. And whether it's atavism or not, it is also what the humans are, they are hoarding. Now look around, would you hoard horseradish or let's say something more common? Would you hoard beans? Not a very good idea. Beans would probably rot after a year. But grains may be a better idea. Wheat, corn, or something, because properly treated, they can be stored, and so that's a possibility. And then there are others. And ultimately, people come up with the idea of metals, because they are really non-perishable. Wheat is perishable, it could contract all kinds of diseases or rot or what, but and precious stones and so on. So there are lots of things, and you could hoard them. And when you do, you are doing exactly conversion into income, conversion of income into wealth, with the hope that later this non-perishable good you have been hoarding can be disposed of piecemeal. So you have a large hoard of wheat, and you eat wheat a little bit, but not all what you eat is wheat, so you will be able to sell some or convert some wheat into something else what you need, and then what you are doing is you are converting wealth into income. So when you survey all possible choices, commodities, for the purposes of conversion, converting income into wealth and wealth into income, what would you choose? Well, you would choose something which is very marketable. But this is not the same marketability anymore, what Menger studied. This is a different kind. Because if you say, okay, precious stones, it's conceivable that precious stones could serve as money. But for the purposes of this conversion here, they are absolutely unsuitable. Because if you cut them up, if you cut up, say, a piece of diamond, then surely the pieces, after you've cut it, some of the value of the pieces will be smaller. And this is non-convertible. You can't go back. Once you have the pieces, you can put them together. So the type of marketability we talk about here is different. And what's the difference? Because now we are talking about marketability in the small. We'll define this later, but I just want you to see that there is a need for splitting the concept into two. And it's important, and the gold, I'm going to explain this another time, but let's say silver. Silver is certainly a highly marketable commodity in the small. And it is so because, for one big reason, is because it's reversible. Suppose you have silver in one big piece and you want to hoard it because you want to convert wealth into income. That's no problem. You cut it up. But now, in the other conversion, you would have to put it together again. And that's possible, no big deal, to melt the pieces and end up with a block. So that convertibility, physical convertibility of big chunk and small pieces is easily done. So I don't want to run out of time, so I just make the long story short, that in solving that problem, after again maybe thousands of years, people came to see that actually I have some evidence for that, but I don't want to go into details now, that silver, surprisingly, was the most hoardable material, which you could say, which was the most marketable in the small. So you could indicate that this is silver answers the problem best when you want to convert, when you want to make the conversion from income to wealth. And gold would be the most marketable in the large. Now, if you feel like arguing this point, it can be argued, but I tell you that in the fairly recent history, going back to the Middle Ages and later, gold was used for paying princely ransoms. If a prince got caught, the pirates caught him and they asked for ransom. And if they had asked for ransom in terms of silver, this would have been too complicated because too much silver. But if it was in gold, well, you can put it in your pocket and take the king out of ransom because gold had that kind of power. And if you wanted to buy a whole country, and this happened not only in the Middle Ages, but in the New Age too. Just think of the Louisiana purchase of the United States at the time of Napoleon, and then the Alaska purchase by the United States, purchasing Alaska from Russia. That was 1860 something. And again, if the price was paid in silver, just the sheer shipping cost would have absorbed a large part of this, because they were talking about the case of Alaska, I think in the order of 6 million, Louisiana maybe twice as much, which was, in terms of silver, was just too much to handle. And it was really gold which could make this transaction complete, because it could be moved physically from one country to the other without major problems. So gold answered this question, and this was the thing which Menger was looking for in finding the origin of money, where the point was always not in very large very small quantities, but rather very large. So ultimately, for the purposes of money, you had to have this property, marketability in the large. We'll make these concepts clear later, but I just want to introduce my subject, and therefore I'm anticipating what I'm going to have to say later. But in the case of the origin of interest, where the basic problem is converting income into wealth and wealth into income, it's not marketability in the large which enters, but marketability in the small. Basically, because converting income into wealth means that you add little pieces which you can easily unite and without major loss in the process of doing the conversion. And of course, the opposite, when you have the wealth, a big chunk, and you want to take years to consume that because you want an income. And therefore, suppose this is a chunk of gold, then you can make little pieces by a pair of clippers or some ways, and it might support you for years, a chunk of gold, you see. And that's marketability in the small, because if you can just break it into two and no more, that's no good, because you want to survive more than 2 days or 2 months or whatever. So you want to have this marketability in almost any small quantity of a certain material. So that's silver, or for the purposes of our course here, we call it silver. So you see, this is the thing. It took so long to find that material, silver in this case, but the question is, can you improve the conversion beyond that? So you found the best material. It's the material which has the best marketability in the small. So we are actually in the position now to find an alternative name for these marketable in the large. So what is the alternative word for marketability in the large?
Liquidity. Liquidity.
Liquidity is possible, but more common would be saleability. Okay, so marketability in the large, alternative word is saleability. And that's what Menger was looking for. Another way of summarizing up Menger's theory of origin of money is the problem is to find the most saleable commodity, and over time it turned out that this was gold. Now, what's the alternative word for marketability in the small?
Liquidity. That would be liquidity.
Well, liquidity is possible, but then you have the same word for two different things, and you want to bring out what is really different here.
Portability.
Hoardability is the word. Hoardability is another word, and perhaps an even better word, because it suggests what. Assuming that under hoardability we also include this hoardability, but there's no need for such this artificial word. However, hoardability is good, because you can build up wealth bits by bits and pieces by hoarding it, But that's not the end of the process, because in the end you want to hoard it in reconverting now wealth back into income. So you see, this so far we have solved at least, say, half of the problem in finding the material which has this capability of making the conversion. But can this be improved further? And if you ask that question and give a little time to yourself to spell out the answer, you see yes. Exactly the same way as Mango did, replacing direct exchange by indirect exchange. So I want to introduce the distinction between direct conversion and indirect conversion of wealth into income, or the other way around.
Oh, shall I left and right?
Well, you could take 4 lines and spell them out. So actually there are 4 lines: direct conversion of wealth into income, direct conversion of income to wealth, and okay, we'll give you a rest. So there it is. If you allow, and this is a big if, to exchange wealth and income, if you allow that, why is it a big if? Because all these guys, the secular authorities and the canonical authorities, the church, are watching what you are doing, and say, you exchange wealth for income? That's usury, that's interest. You are taking interest. You'll be taken to the Inquisition or the civil courts and so on, and you are committing a capital crime, you see. So, but if you are allowed, the authorities do not interfere with the free choice of individuals. And there is a man who can spare income, and then he needs wealth, and there's a man who can spare wealth but needs income. They meet, and they agree on their terms, which they both accept voluntarily, without any threat of usury court or inquisition. They make the exchange. They could improve, and both will get better terms than without. So this you can call atavistic indeed, the hoarding and dishoarding. But unfortunately, as our history developed, to a very, very large part, the blame goes to Aristotle, who said basically that money does not beget money. I mean, sheep begets sheep, cows can beget cows, or cattle can beget cattle, but gold cannot beget gold, and silver cannot beget silver. Now, I'm not going to start a debate with Aristotle. This is, even modern economists would agree with that Aristotle completely missed the point there. But the blame, to a very large part, goes to Aristotle, because he had the reputation. What he said was sacred, and what Thomas of Aquinas Saint Thomas of Aquinas, I think 13th century theologian, took Aristotle and lock, stock, and barrel, incorporated into Christian theology. Now, I'm not going to discuss the aspects, but lock, stock, and barrel meant that he incorporated Aristotle and Aristotle's views on the question whether money can beget money, meaning gold or silver, and that completely put science and theology, or even more moral philosophy, on the wrong track. And this we suffered. It was only in the late 19th century when the Pope I can't tell you which Pope because I didn't memorize his name, but there was a Pope who said that to the confessors, to the father confessors, Pope wrote the book, what the confessors should do and how they should do it and what they should not do. And the Pope just removed this, that the father confessors should no longer disturb, I think that's the word he used, disturb the confessants, the people who go to confession, should not disturb them if they, during the confession, admit that they charged or paid interest. Because before, that was part of the confessor to take the confession, and if somebody confessed that he had charged or even paid, that was a sin just as much as charging interest. You see, no longer. So that was the end of that epoch, because before Reformation it was an entirely different world. The Reformation broke the ice, and then little by little people realized that actually it's beneficial for both the lender and the borrower. And this was the end of that. And after that, exchanging wealth for income, income for wealth was possible. No stigma attached, and no criminal or offense was involved, and no canonical charges could be made. It was quite legitimate at that point. But it took an enormous amount of time to reach that stage. And during all this time, to the late 19th century, this was like a clamp on science, on studying what we are trying to study, develop a theory of origin of interest. This was a tremendous backlog, because even talking about these things in some cases was a criminal offense or a canonically questionable activity. And this is one reason why the question of the origin of interest is in such a sorry state even today, because all this background of studying analyzing, comparing cases was not being done, partly or mainly because of the threat of canonical or secular charges against you. We are trying to promote interest, which is in itself a criminal offense, or used to be. So we just have to agree that we are breaking new grounds, and